get that started right now so that those who are not able to attend live can listen to this great information later. And we share that information out on the CS for All Teachers website. But we are being led tonight by one of our community ambassadors, Nicole Reese-Larson, and she's going to be the host with the most this evening, and she's got two wonderful panelists that's going to share, including another of our community ambassadors, Pam. So we're happy to have all three of them here, as well as those of you that are joining us as participants. So without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and let Nicole take things from here. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Melissa, for getting us started. So I am super excited to have two ladies on tonight, Deborah Fields and Pamela. We are going to be talking about e-textiles. So Deborah is a professor at Utah State University. She is a book author and curriculum writer for the ECS Unit 6 e-textiles, which is super exciting because that's kind of a new thing in version 8 of ECS. And Pamela is a high school teacher out of LA. She is also a community ambassador. She teaches Exploring Computer Science and the AP Computer Science Principles. So we have both ladies on tonight talking to us about e-textiles. I'm excited to hear from both of them about how it's been going in the classroom and how students are engaged with this curriculum and the e-textiles. Just thinking about all these students and all these little things all over the classroom gets me a little nervous. So I'm excited to hear from their expertise. So it's going to be super fun. I am a high school teacher in Salt Lake City, Utah. I teach ECS and computer science principles. And so I will hopefully be able to get enough funding to do the e-textiles unit next year. I'm looking forward to hearing some ideas from Pam and Deborah on how to get things started. So first thing we have is a poll. So if you would like to bring the poll up, Melissa, that would be great. So for those of us that have joined, if you have ever had students create anything with e-textile projects, we would love to hear. I think it's always great to find out a little bit about the folks on the webinar so we can kind of tailor our topics to your conversations of what you're doing, what you've tried. And it looks like we've got some who have tried, some who have not yet tried. I know that I have tried it myself, but not with students yet. So looks like we've got 85% who this will be new for. So that gives us a good idea of how to tailor our conversations. So Melissa, if you want to bring back the slides, we will kind of go from there. I'm sure we'll get more people to join us as we go through, so we will kind of get started. For those of you that are familiar with the ECS curriculum, the Exploring Computer Science curriculum, it's made to work with students at the high school level. There are 6 units, and in versions 1 through 6, 7, that last unit of Exploring Computer Science was a robotics unit. And in version 8 that just came out this summer, we have the e-textile units. So as we think about Exploring Computer Science and how they kind of use the curriculum, a lot of it ties on 3 strands. One of those strands being equity. How do we make it so that all students are engaged in our classes? How do we teach with inquiry to get students wanting to know those computer science concepts that we're teaching them? And then what are those topics that we want them to get by the end of the day? And so one of the things I love about Exploring Computer Science is that my students used to want the vocabulary words and tell me recipe step by step what to do to get my A. And once they came into my class, they were like, oh, you're not going to tell us what to do to get the A. No, I'm not. What we're going to do is we're going to get you excited about the topics, and we're going to do activities in groups to engage you so that then we can tell you what it is you just did. So I think a lot of things that we want to make connections with as we're thinking about computer science is problem solving. How is it that we use technology or creating things to have fun or to show off? How do we use problem solving to make those things happen? How do we kind of design that, storyboard it? And then how do we bring programming into that? There's got to be some thought process on what we want to do. And then a lot of the the planning and persistence. Sometimes you make a plan and it doesn't always work. So how do we continue and have fun with projects that are engaging? The curriculum you can download for free. We've got a link here, theexploringcs.org/e-textiles. And Deborah can tell us a little bit more about that as we get going. But I wanted you to know that it is part of a whole curriculum. So if you pick up the curriculum and you're like, oh, this doesn't tell me how to do things, how I'm traditionally used to, Deborah's our expert. She can help us out. But know that it's part of a bigger curriculum set. So I'm going to turn the time over to Deborah to hear a little bit about the curriculum and how she got involved with this awesome project.
So we've been working on this curriculum for several years. We worked on it with some LA schools. And by the way, I'm in a cafe, so if you hear noise, that's why. But and this is sort of the culmination of about 8 years of work with E Textiles. So we've been developing activities for electronic textiles, particularly in computer science context, for a while. And we felt it was time to try to formalize it, and then work with Joanna Good and Jane Margolis from ECS to try to, it seemed like a good fit for another unit in ECS. So we had a number of goals. You know, we wanted to make sure the learning was rigorous, that it wasn't just a cutesy project. So there's a lot of challenging learning in this unit, particularly with some conditional statements, of using multiple conditional statements or embedded ones, and then with using sensors, so input and output and those sorts of things. And yet we also wanted it to be personal, and we find that e-textiles are just so ripe for personal engagement, particularly if you start with what kids want to make, and you really forward the aesthetic choices first, and then you follow with how to actually do it. And we wanted to see if we could do it with one teacher. We've had a lot of success with that, although it's not necessarily easy. And then, of course, we want to make sure that all students are engaged. And one of the fun things about electronic textiles is, you know, a lot of teachers have commented to us that it kind of levels the expertise in the class. So instead of having a few students, maybe for whom some abstract ideas or code comes really naturally, all of a sudden, like, they're just one of a type of expertise. Like, there's other kids who bring in more artistry or crafting experience, or who just take to the electronics, or who code in different ways. So it's really fun for those aspects. I'm going to be really brief here so that we can try to curtail this to your questions and then get to some of Pam's experiences teaching this. But we have 4 projects in the unit. So it's a very project-focused unit. The idea is that by creating these really fun projects, the kids will learn as they go. So coding is not the object. It's simply a means to creating these really neat projects. And we designed them so that kids need to learn certain skills in order to accomplish their goals. 4 projects, they start off really simple. The paper circuit is a short project. It helps get people started with, you know, foregrounding the students' designs, and then learning just a simple circuit, get them used to some of the electronics, and also just steps in completing a project, because that's another big part of the unit and debugging. And then the wristband takes a little bit longer. You sew 3 lights in parallel, so they're learning some slightly more sophisticated circuitry. There's room for a lot of aesthetics, but it's limited. Just a little band around your wrist. So we try to give more choices as the project continues, so as not to overwhelm the kids. And then what we do is we start some basic coding at the end of the wristband, so that the kids are essentially coding their wristband. Because, okay, the lights turn on, big deal. It's really fun, but it's really natural to want to make those lights blink and do different patterns. So we use the wristbands to start doing that. And then we have a collaborative project, because ECS is all about collaboration. And this uses 2 switches. So if you have 2 switches, you can have 4 conditions. We start with just an if-else, using a basic condition. So if I do the switch, then maybe I want the lights to blink in one pattern. If I switch it, have the lights blink in another pattern. It works in pairs, and we have the students split up the tasks between the crafting part and the circuitry and the coding part, and then switch, so that everyone is getting opportunities to do both. So it's a structured collaboration. And it's also collaborative for the class. The idea is that each group is making kind of like a quilt square. And so you can see. So it's the class chooses the theme, and they come all together. So we've had a lot of different themes, from movies to Pac-Man to crossing your locale and those sorts of things. And the final project, we go back to an individual project. So by this time, everyone has experience making circuits and sewing, and they're pretty comfortable with that. They also have experience coding, although they've only had one project where they're really seriously coding. So the human sensor project is a nice culminating project. It takes a little bit longer. And we have handmade sensors made with aluminum foil. So you squeeze it, and then you use those squeezes. The computer reads basically how hard you're squeezing, or more in reality, like how much electricity you're conducting between your two hands, and use that to, so that's your input. And so it's really fun. One of the things that I think really works really well about E Textiles is it takes abstract things, circuit, code, and they're very concrete. They're physically embodied. So when you're making sequences of light, you can see if your lighting patterns work. Similarly with the sensor, we really wanted a handmade sensor so the kids can see the correlation between squeezing and seeing these numbers on the screen. And then they have to decide how they want people to act and try to trigger that. And this is where we find that the students really start debugging their sensors for end user stuff. So that you get into sort of this is intended for someone else to use, as well as yourself. You have to maybe compare. Different people have different readings. And it's really neat because it also allows everyone to do the same project. In essence, you're teaching the same concepts, the same ideas, but everyone's project is unique because the sensors, based on how big they are, what shapes they are, how they're connected, they're all going to get different readings. So it's a way to sort of teach something common, but yet have this really personally tangible thing. So now I'm going to hand it back off to Nicole, I think.
Yeah, so I'm curious, Pam, what kind of projects you've tried with your students? Did you ever talk a little bit about the squares and the band and the sensors? What have you tried in your class, and what age group are you working with? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm a 9th through 12th grade teacher, and last year, this is my second year doing E Textiles, and I did it last year with 9th graders. And at first it was a little difficult because, especially with the boys, the one thing that they're uncomfortable with is sewing. And so once they started getting into the sewing and they realized, hey, this is cool, I've learned how to sew, along with, coding, they really liked it. I tried the paper circuit, the e-card. I tried the wristband, the mural, and we got into the human sensor project, but we didn't finish. And that's the one thing that I want to, let everybody know, that you have to really gauge your students and you can't rush them. So this is a unit that you want to give yourself enough time to work on. I mean, obviously you can, maybe take out one of the projects, but give your students enough time and, give them the space and the time that they need to be creative. Otherwise, they'll feel rushed. That's one tip that I wanted to share with everybody.
Now, as you wrote the curriculum, Deborah, how did you time out how long it would take to make a project? And then, Pam, how did that play out in your class? We know that we have this grandiose idea of things happening, and then like assemblies happen, and fire drills, and all that kind of stuff.
Right?
So we started off with how long it takes to do the project if you're focused. It's a little easier when you have long periods of focus, but some of us have 60-minute classes 5 days a week or 4 days a week or whatever, and so you just adapt. It's also going to depend on you as a teacher. So what we've found, we did this. We piloted this for 3 years before we released the curriculum. So we're fairly confident that it can work. Although first, make all the projects yourself. If you don't, I wouldn't teach it. Drop it, go home. Because what we found is, like, if you don't do it yourself, you really don't have an inside understanding. It's like, why would you try to teach some code or some concept that you haven't learned for yourself? You're still going to run into a lot of unique issues. Like, I've been doing this for 9 years, and I still run into new problems that I'm like, I don't know how you created that problem, but that's unique, so thanks for introducing that to me. The other thing we found is that for your first time, if you want to do the full unit, for the first time, leave 12 weeks. That's a long time. I really think it can be done in 10 if you're not taking field trips, testing, and all that, right? Like 10 actual weeks. And it can probably be done a little bit shorter if you can really get your kids focused. And that means, so these are projects, and a lot of students are not used to monitoring their time. What we see, and you'll see this if you do the paper circuit and you let them draw their ideas first and then follow through, you will see just loads of personal expression in some of those paper cards. They're drawing, they're coloring, they might go home, bring in stickers. It's fabulous to see that engagement, but the students are like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden I have room for personal expression in school, and they'll take as much of that space as you allow them. And so there's a bit of a tension, how much time do you allow for decorating, how much time do you focus things in class. One thing I find really helps is, do allow for some personalization and decorating in class, but that's also quite often not something that they can do at home that they already have skills to do. So I try to focus the class time on the things that they can't really do without your help. So designing the circuitry, practicing the coding, debugging the coding. A lot of students, if they're given the opportunity, will come in for lunch and for after school if you let them. Some teachers have said they've had students come in for the first time outside of class, but you also have to make those opportunities, and that's your time. And then, like I said, first year we recommend 12 weeks. Almost all the teachers who allowed that last year were able to finish the unit. But and then the second year it comes more compressed because you as a teacher have to learn to teach in a slightly different style, right? It's more project focused, it's personalized. You are teaching the same content. You have to build a culture where you can let peers teach each other. So a lot of getting up, walking around the room, sharing ideas. But that takes time to create. So you may have some of that from your ECS culture that you've built already. That helps a lot. And then a lot of our teachers will develop small minor goals. Like today, your goal is to sew that negative line in your circuit. Today, you need to connect your two lights. Today, turn your lights on. So like I said, that gets back to the students not having a lot of experience with managing a bigger project, which is why we scaffold the project up. And then, some are just going to want to go above and beyond, and some of them can do that on their own time or after school. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
and Karen, in the class, what did you notice?
On the 12 weeks, I started mine in mid-March last year and didn't finish the human sensor. But yeah, anywhere from, I think, 10 to 12 weeks is what you would need to get all of the projects done.
And then did you have any tips or tricks on managing the classroom and students helping each other, as Deborah mentioned, or how did you engage participation? So you had some students who were just kind of waiting for everyone to do the project for them or spending all day on the creation piece.
The students, there's always those students that really like to work by themselves, and those are the ones that I encourage to work with somebody because they usually have the most problems because they don't really want to share. So this is a good experience for those students who don't really like to work with other students, because if they get stuck, they can ask somebody else. So I did a lot of pair work in more than group work, because sometimes when you do group work, when I did group work last year, the students got distracted. So working in pairs, it kept them a little bit more engaged. The hardest thing to me last year was the sewing. And I wanted to talk about the sewing. I don't know if there's other questions that you were going to ask, but I just want to address the sewing, because last year I don't think I spent enough time pre the sewing part of it. Today I started the sewing part in my second year, and I spent a whole period in sewing. I had them all, thread a needle and then create a knot. And I made sure that each and every one of the students was able to thread a needle and create a knot, because those sometimes seem to be the hardest part for the kids, to create the knot. And so I watched them, we saw a video, and then I had them do it, and I made sure everybody did it. So I want to spend more time on the sewing this time, because last time a lot of kids had issues with sewing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I'm going to share one
issue.
I'm going to share one thing that's going to cause me to jump a bunch of slides. It's one of my favorite teaching practices that we've seen. So I just got to get over to slide 19. Okay, so there's a really amazing opportunity. One of the things that when we talk with teachers, they like the best is how many mistakes happen in e-textiles, which is sort of counterintuitive. But the mistakes or the bugs allow for a few things. One, it allows you to focus students on the process of making something and not just having something that's perfect the first time. Every educator ever wants students to learn to revise, to debug, to iterate, and this is a perfect opportunity for that. So we see a lot of redesigning, a lot of students not taking your advice, sewing something maybe not the best way, and then they realize the consequences of that, and they're often invested enough to go back and change it. One other thing that a teaching practice that can really support this is modeling your own mistakes. So make your projects first, all of them, and note the times that you screw up. And share those. Those are wonderful learning opportunities. And it also makes it okay for students to make mistakes too, so it lowers the stakes of failure, or maybe not failure, but bugs and issues. I have a teacher who goes around, and when students do something that doesn't work out and he's helping them fix it, he calls everyone's class, the whole class attention, says, "Hey everybody, this is my favorite mistake of the day," and highlights what it is. And it's a wonderful in-the-moment, just-in-time learning thing that celebrates a mistake as a learning moment. Another thing you can do just on the same line is share tips and tricks. Like have the students write down, what tip would you give to someone else? Because that usually comes from some mistake that they've made and they've fixed. The more you can spread everyone's mistakes, the more people learn. I've learned so much from helping with other people's mistakes that I haven't made. Mistakes, bugs, whatever. And then by having students share tips and tricks, you locate the expertise in the students. So you give them ownership of the expertise. It gives them ownership over some of that classroom knowledge now, instead of it all being located in the teacher. So anyways, I'll jump back slides, but that's my favorite thing.
I like that productive failure. I'd love to hear from folks who are online, either in the audience chat, or you can come up top to the raise your hand and join in. But I'd love to hear how you deal with that positive failure. I once heard in a workshop I was in, fail stands for first attempt in learning. So I was like, oh, that's your first attempt. Well, when you learn to play a sport, you have multiple attempts in trying to learn how to dribble a ball. Or when you play an instrument, how often do you sound terrible before you ever sound good? So if this is your first attempt, well, I'm excited to see the next 4 attempts. But what are some tips and tricks that you all use to kind of get students to keep going when they have those little mini failures or those bumps in the road? Let's see what you guys can share with us in the chat.
Are you waiting for a chat? Because I have a tip and trick.
Yeah, sure. Share a tip with us.
So 100% what Debbie says, celebrate their mistakes, because I always tell my kids, you can't learn without making a mistake. There's nobody that hasn't invented something without making mistakes. So mistakes are good. They're learning tools. But just celebrating anything, like Debbie says, benchmarks. When they've sewn one LED light on, that's a really good thing for them to see. And one of the things that I noticed that a lot of my kids were doing, trying to take shortcuts, well, not a lot, but some of them, like they're sewing the big stitches. So you want to tell them ahead of time to not make the stitches so, wide, because then it gets loose and things like that. So watch for your kids that their sewing is, no more than an inch or half an inch, Debbie? I can't remember exactly, between each stitch. Because
quarter inch.
Yeah, quarter inch, yeah. And they were huge, and then it would get really loose, and then the lights wouldn't turn on. So that's one tip I wanted to share.
So
yeah, and often we see them.
Know a quarter inch.
Yeah, quarter inch. Yeah.
Well, you can model it for them.
Yeah.
And what I'll do is if their stitches are really long, I just go and yank them out. Because there's an actual reason for it. Like, don't do quarter-inch stitches just because we told you to. There's like a functional reason behind it. And often in the wristbands, you see a lot of really crummy sewing, particularly for kids that are brand new. And that's a motor skill. It takes time to learn that motor skill. So let them be crummy. But that's a practice. And then the next one, they usually improve. And if they have to debug because their stitches are all over the place and their threads are crossing and their lights aren't turning on and their battery's getting hot, which, by the way, take the battery out. Yeah, it's fun.
Wow. I hear that Joanna uses plastic shoe boxes to have student projects in, and Deborah mentioned the gallon-sized Ziplocs. I think that managing piece is huge. So if we want Pam to share a little bit with us about managing supplies on the slide here as one of our big ideas, I would love to hear how you manage all these things.
Okay, yeah, it is. You really should get organized before you start the unit. I was lucky enough to get my supplies from Debbie's grant, so I haven't really had, a low amount of supplies. However, I did find out that last year, if you don't have the students be careful, they will lose things. A lot of needles got lost. A lot of scissors got lost. So what I like to do is I like to keep everything in one place, and everybody can do it the way they want to, but I learned from last year, and giving everybody one of everything, I lost a lot of supplies. So I pretty much keep everything in like boxes. I have all my scissors in one box, all of the needles, the sewing, and I categorize them. But they each get a Ziploc bag to put their actual projects in. And if I give them a needle and a thread, and I also tell them to be careful because I found a lot of needles lost, and it's kind of dangerous to have needles just falling around. So I would be careful with making sure that you don't give everybody one of everything, because then it walks away. Only what they really need on a daily basis, because they had, part of the supplies are the color pencils, the erasers, I'm trying to think of the fabric markers, the glue. There's a lot of different supplies that you can get, and they easily get lost or wasted. So my idea is just to manage everything myself and give them only what they absolutely need.
We've also seen a lot of other teachers. So Pam's class right now is a computer lab, and so it's really hard to have shared supplies amongst small groups of kids. But we've had a lot of success in some other classrooms where you can have tables, where you don't have those computers in the way, where you can have a shared table supply, and maybe that's where you have some thread, needles, scissors, and stuff. That way everyone can share those and put those away at the end of the day, and then have a separate storage for their individual projects, which can go right in that bin. So all of this, whatever you do, you have to build the classroom practices. Students won't know how you want them to manage materials until you show them. So, woo, exciting movement. So, sorry for the noise. So one common easy thing to do is like have like one person from a table go get the shared supplies and all their individual projects out. Just start a class when they come in before class, and then have that same person put it away. Or like Pam has this great organizing system where it's like alphabetized with students' individual bags of their projects, and they just pull it out and then they put it back. And it happens before and after class now. At the beginning, getting all those supplies out and then putting them back takes a little bit of time. And you have to train students like, okay, what do you do with your needle? You either stuff it in your project, or you put it back in your needle holder, which could be as simple as a piece of paper or a piece of felt, scrap felt, or like whatever, a needle pincushion.
That's a great idea. I've seen some teachers get like a jewelry case that like hangs up, or like a shoe thing, and have like little cubbies for the things to be in there. But then if you have multiple classes who are sharing, you kind of have to make sure that they put it back so the person in the next class can pull it out. Any ideas from Joanna or those who have already tried some of the e-textiles of how you manage the supplies?
While Joanna's typing, if you guys have any other questions that you want answered, please raise them.
Looks like Joanna has a pegboard to organize all the e-textile supplies. So that's a great idea. And I think as we start having more maker stations, I'd love to see like a whole Pinterest board, different ways that people set up just the physical aspect of how to put things up there, and then having kids come in and get things. I think that's a great way to like re-emphasize algorithms. Like, what are their algorithms to go ahead and get the supplies? What their algorithm to put them away? But trying to talk about those procedures that we always have to kind of have happen. It looks like Joanna's in a computer lab. I think a lot of teachers will be in computer labs. So maybe finding a way to bring the keyboard and putting it kind of on the side, or making space for two people to work together, because I think that that's key to have a partner keep you on track, definitely. Pam, I'd love to hear with, what you do with getting started with e-textiles. How did you bring that unit in? How did you get the kids excited about it? And then how did you kind of scaffold those projects?
The kids, we had just finished, I skipped around in the ECS curriculum, so I just finished the scratch unit, and the kids were actually pretty bored with Scratch, and so I kept telling them, finish your final project for Scratch, because we're going to do something really exciting. You're going to get to play with lights and circuitry, and so I kind of, kept telling them every day about this exciting new thing we were going to be doing, and they were going to be doing something different. It was very hands-on. And when I introduced it, I followed Debbie's curriculum pretty much to a T. So I started with the e-card and the batteries. They were really excited when I started showing them what a battery was and how the little lights that you start lighting up. And I don't know, something about the boys, they really get excited with lights. It's just, I don't know, they just love it. And so that's pretty much how I did it. And then now I'm going to start on the wristband project. And I thought I was a little bit concerned with the boys because of the sewing, because they're the ones that complain about the sewing. But they were the ones that are actually the more excited than the girls to learn how to sew. They're like, oh, this is cool. When I get out of here, I'm going to know how to sew. So all of these different things that they're doing, especially hands-on, kinesthetic stuff, it really engages them. So I can hardly wait to see what they produce.
Awesome. Now, as you talk about the e-cards, can you tell us a little bit more, what do they do with the e-cards? You talked about batteries a little bit and lights. Well, do they glue them on? Do they sew them on? Or what do they do with the e-card?
No, the e-card is just them learning basic circuitry. It's really basic. They use the tape. I love Debbie's idea because the card has like a light bulb on the front, and the prompt is, think about something that you'd want to light up and I remember when I did it in the PD, you know, I really found that interesting because, like, you think about all the things. What do you want to light up? What do you want to, you know? And as an educator, I was thinking about knowledge, okay, but the kids actually think about other things. So that's really what they do. They draw first something that they want to light up. They don't actually do the circuit until after they make their drawing. The only problem I had this year was the kids didn't do a lot of decorating. They were more interested in the circuitry part of it. But last year I got a lot of really cool e-cards. This year not as decorative as I did, but and then after they do that, then they learn how to do the circuit, how to do a really basic circuit. Right, Debbie? I mean, I don't know if did I leave anything out? But I think there's go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's great, as you mentioned, to have them think about something they'd like to light up. I think having students stop and pause and journal is one of those things that kind of they do all throughout the ECS curriculum, but so often we don't give students the opportunity to do that self-expression that Deborah mentioned and actually be thoughtful of, wow, what's important to me? What do I want to light up? And hopefully there's that classroom culture created where students feel like they can share and put things that are meaningful to them, whether it's something personal or something that they thought about with their community. But wow, having that question of what would you want to light up? Is it someone who's maybe down, or what kind of things like that?
One thing I forgot to note was in this unit, there's a lot of journaling. Debbie has something that we call the design notebook, and it's the relationship is like artists, like Da Vinci, and that's part of something that I didn't mention that we start talking about in the beginning also, what the purpose of a design notebook is. And in that notebook, they draw their circuit diagrams, they do their sketches of things that they want to create. So that's another thing that's really good. They get to do a lot of journaling. And I always tell them when they do this, there's no right or wrong answers, because students are programmed to think there's either a right answer or a wrong answer, but I keep telling them there's no right or wrong answer. This is just what you believe is true.
I think another thing that's really inspiring for students are the teachers' projects. So if you make yours and put it up in the classroom so they can see, a lot of students model what they make based on what the teacher does. So if you made a stuffed animal for your human sensor project, a lot of students tend to do that. So it helps if you can make one or two, and then once you've done it once, keep some projects from prior years if the students let you. Another thing is to try to make what the students are doing as transparent as possible to each other. So we might call this distributed cognition or open tools or something like that. It's showing them each other's projects, so having a gallery walk, holding up someone's project. If they're working at tables, it's a little easier because they can just sort of look over and see. If you're in a situation where the space constrains how much you can overlook someone else, which is often something we teach students not to do in a classroom because we don't want them to look over each other's work. But in this unit, it's completely legit and actually really helps you a lot if you can get students to look at each other's stuff. So they get ideas, oh, someone else did that. That's really cool. Someone else did that, you know. That can really help. You can also show we have a technical guide to accompany the curriculum, and we show lots of sample pictures of projects. So some teachers have taken those and made like a little PowerPoint presentation where they show some ideas. And again, the more you can spread ideas, the more free students feel for self-expression. So.
Awesome. I like that idea of doing gallery walks. I feel like students, when they know they have to share, they put more thought into their projects. And same with journaling. When they know that they're going to be sharing their journal or their sketch or their idea with someone else and getting feedback, that they take more time. I love to have my students write down their plan or idea for a project and then give other students sticky notes, and they have to put like a glow and a grow on the sticky note for that project plan, because students haven't formulated in their mind what they want to do, but actually getting it on paper and breaking it down into something doable is really hard. It's a hard task, and so I love to give the stickies where I'm like, hey, write your sticky, your thought on your sticky, put it on that person's notebook, and then if there's things that, of course, aren't that great, I can always pull those stickies off because it's not permanent in the notebook so that people don't feel like, oh, don't attack my idea. And I try to leave some of the positive ones or break down. Well, what is it that they ask you more questions about that you need to work on? So I think that's awesome. I know that Joanna put that she's using journaling as blog posts to capture ideas of their projects. I think that blog posts are awesome. Do people use journaling online, digital, or do most of you, if you do journal, do it on paper and pencil? I know that people have different opinions on the paper and pencil versus digital journaling.
In my classroom, I do a combination because I like to be able to read them right after they write them, and if they're in their notebooks, it's kind of hard to, to go to, after a class to go and sit there, but then I could come home and just read their journal entries. So I do a combination of both. The other thing I wanted to say, I was noticing someone was talking about pictures. Another thing we do in E-Textiles, which I love, Debbie has us do, is take pictures of certain points of their projects. So, when they get to a certain point, they'll take a picture, and then they get to another point, they'll take a picture, and then they'll take a picture at the end. Because there's a portfolio at the end of and then someone just put up their portfolio slide that they do, and they show where their project was at one point and maybe an error that they made, and then they show the finished project. And they talk about maybe the different iterations and some of the successes and some of the challenges that they had in creating the project.
Awesome. I love these portfolio pieces in here with kind of like revision, reflection, kind of topics to guide their thinking. Can you talk a bit more about some of these, Deborah, or how you have the teachers kind of design?
Yeah, well, it's in the curriculum. So in in our first year of the curriculum, we didn't have the portfolios. We added that in the second and third year, and it's in the final version. So one, this needs a ton of CS standards if you need them, also writing. It really helps to get the students more conscious about what they've learned in their design process. It also helps value that process and those mistakes. So we try to coach it in some projects. We have them do a portfolio, and we try to get them to take a picture of where their project is at, like every day. Their project, their code, whatever it is they worked on. If they make a mistake, they're like, oh, take a picture, right? Take a picture of all that messy stuff, and then take a picture after you fix it or change it. So we have the portfolio include, one, a basic description of the project. So a really good example is this little minion picture on the upper left here. They say how it works. This is exactly what they have to do for their APCS principles thing, by the way. So we modeled it as like an early version of that. Next, we require two things, two either changes or fixes that you made. So what's a problem that came up and how did you deal with it? So that forces them to name a problem and then often to narrow the problem down and to verbalize this. They can also point to it in the pictures. So we try to get them to annotate their pictures rather than just leaving them blank with no title. So this is also a good communication thing. Or maybe no mistake happened, but they preempted a mistake by making a change, or maybe they just made a change because they felt like it. It's almost impossible not to do the human sensor project without making some change in your design or debugging something. And then at the end, we ask them to reflect on what they learned in the unit overall. So a lot of them are really concrete. They're like, I learned how to sew, look at my evidence of learning how to sew better, or I learned how to code, text-based code. Some of them say I became a better problem solver, or I learned how to plan, or I helped other people. So that's just, it's pretty open. You can make it like a physical journal if you want, or you can have it be a PowerPoint or a Google thing or a website. We've seen a lot of different versions. We try not to make it too complex because we really wanted to focus on the project and not get so caught up with the recording and reflection that you miss out on project time. But these have been really good evidence of learning, and so really cool.
Let's stay on this slide for a minute. As you're thinking about some of our audience here, how would you tailor some of these projects to younger students in elementary or middle school students? Or what tips would you give some of the teachers?
Well, first of all, you could just, if you're working with a younger population, you could modify the curriculum to almost all be paper and tape. So, you know, it depends on the sewing skills in your community, and those are going to be harder skills for younger students, but it's not impossible for them to do it, right? It might just take a little longer to learn. We've seen some teachers bring in parents to help. That's fine, to make a nice intergenerational thing. You can also, what was I thinking? So okay, there's that. You could also, some of the computing concepts are going to be very challenging for a younger audience. So you might keep it with a simple mural project, maybe just use one switch. Or maybe with a human sensor project, we recommend having 4 conditions, right? So you have no touching, touching a little, touching more, and really squeezing hard. But you could simplify that to be touching or not touching. So you would simply write the ranges different. So there are ways that, you know, for a high school class that's meant to maybe start kids on the trajectory of computer science, we really want maybe the higher rigor and really getting all 4 conditions, so they're learning to write multiple if statements and mathematically express, like if it's greater than 500 but less than 700, you know, that's their range. But you could simplify that for younger audiences if you just want to get a certain concept. It's like an if-else statement.
Now, I like some of those ideas. I think a lot of times if you break down the activity, like the 4 conditions, into maybe just 2, even talking to students in elementary courses, hey, what kind of toys do you have at home that you touch and they're sensors? Or let's make a list of, you know, some of the things that we have in our classroom that have sensors. How does it take that input? How does it show you? Does it vibrate? Does it make a sound? How long is the sound? But all those different ways to just make awareness of the students, so that then they can think about, well, what is it that I want my project to do? And maybe it is just one light that they sew on, but how exciting is that for a student to see, like, hey, I made this thing happen. And then maybe in another year, they do a different project. And so really, if you think about each year having kids do something that's style-based, they could build awesome projects, which means those of us at the high school would really have to up our game if they're getting a lot of exposure when they're younger, because so many of us, this is new. I'm excited to kind of find out from elementary teachers who are on tonight, what kind of ideas do you have now that you've seen some of the projects and the writing pieces? How might you engage in this kind of a unit with your students, or what might you try? You can kind of share in the chat window, or if you want to join by audio, I'd love to hear some ideas of what you think you could do in your class and what grade you teach.
I'm also going to list the name of one of my colleagues at Utah State. And I work for Utah State University, but I live in Los Angeles. So sorry for those of you who live in Utah, and new for those of you who live in Los Angeles. But my colleague, Colby Tolfogirl, is working on E-Textiles for science classes. So she emphasizes more of the science end and using the E-Textiles as instruments to measure things, and a little less of the coding. So the kids don't get quite as in-depth into the coding and the computational thinking side, but more into using these as science. And she's developed some material. She's an elementary science teacher, was her career before she became a faculty member. You can always be in touch with her. She does a ton of work in Utah also, and in the Intermountain West, if you happen to be in those areas.
Awesome. So I will have to Google Kobe and see what I can find, because I think that that's a huge connection that we could make between elementary, middle school, and high school. What are those projects in your local community that the middle school is doing, or the elementary school? And then how can you even do, like during Computer Science Education Week, how could you connect with those other schools to find out how they're doing things, and even supporting them. Maybe some of your high school students can help the younger students do the sewing, or maybe they can help them with some of their design and their projects. So that would be awesome. So elementary teachers, I'd love to hear from you. Looks like we've got Ann talking or typing right now. Let's see what some suggestions she has. And while she's typing, tips and tricks, Pam, that you might have for us as we're thinking about a teacher new to E-Textiles. Would they maybe want to start with one project? Would they maybe want to start with the e-card? Or what kind of suggestions would you set for them as they're kind of tinkering with the idea of getting started? Oh, you're muted.
Again, sorry. I would definitely do everything in the unit, as Deborah said, yourself. So before you even start, do the e-card on your own. Read up, do as much research as you can. Like, if you're not sure about circuits, the lessons are very, very step-by-step. It's really not that hard to understand. But when you start getting into the more difficult, if you're not really good at coding, make sure you do all the coding yourself. All the sewing, everything, do it yourself ahead of time so that you know. Do not walk in there and try to start a lesson without having done it yourself and doing a lot of the reading ahead of time so that you understand what it is you're trying to teach, because you don't want to get stuck in the middle of a lesson and not know exactly what needs to get done, or not be able to maybe guide students, because as Deborah said, there's a lot of good mistakes that happen, and you want to highlight those mistakes. But if you're not sure what those mistakes are and how to help students work through them, then you might not, it might make you feel uncomfortable, and you might not be successful.
And what coding language do the projects use?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
What coding language do the projects use?
It's Arduino. It's Java based, right? Yeah. And so it's really easy.
Arduino.
Yeah,
you could, if you wanted to. Oh, sorry. The materials we recommend are the Circuit Playground Classic. But if you're willing to pay $5 more, you can use the Circuit Playground Express, which is designed to work with MakeCode. So if you really want to be in a visual programming environment, you could be. You'd have to sort of make that translation yourself, because we've designed the materials to be used with Arduino, but it is possible. Mostly we didn't do that because we'd already made the whole unit, and it was meant to be used with Arduino. Also, we find that students really like to use text-based code, even though, gosh, they make so many mistakes with capital letters and syntax and stuff. They feel more professional, and there's been a lot of research on that. Like, even though you can really get deeper more quickly in some ways with block-based code, they feel it's more authentic and text-based. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We've got just a couple minutes, so I want to make sure that if you have any questions, you put them in the chat window, or you can ask them while we've got our expert panelists on the line. I always think it's great to hear from a teacher who's tried it out in the classroom, and also Deborah, who's had the opportunity to work with teachers and create the curriculum. It looks like Deborah shared her email address here. We've also got a short survey for you to fill out, if you would, once we finish up the webinar. So we've got the Survey Monkey for you to fill out. We've got a couple other events coming up soon. So on February 25th through March 1st, we've got what's called a slow Twitter chat, where we have one post a day on getting makers in the classroom and how to be inclusive. And then in March, we've got a webinar coming up on using cooperative learning strategies to engage students. And I think at this time of year right now, you've got about a month in March where you don't have a lot going on. Students are kind of getting tired of school, they want spring break to happen, and so this webinar on cooperative learning strategies is a fun webinar where we'll have different teachers share things they do to get kids talking, to get kids in groups, kind of like get book rounds going on, so that will be awesome. As for those of you who have not been on the CS for All Teachers Community site, we have a lot of different groups that you can go visit. In our CS and elementary group, we have some resources on Black History Month and Valentine's activities. We have some encryption activities in the middle school group. In the ECS Open group, there's some professional development opportunities. In the CSP Open group, if you are working on your Explore task, there's a great resource called the Survival Guide, which kind of helps the students as they're writing for that big project. On CS in the Wild, we have CS in Movies, the good, the bad, the ugly, and sometimes it's fun to bring in where we see computer science happening in movies. And then in the community blog, we have a post about CS Absolutely Matters in Communities of Colors by one of our ambassadors, Donald. The link again to the resources is exploringcs.org/etextiles. So you can go there, check out all the things that Deborah's been sharing, as well as email her if you've got any questions. And then if you have not become a member yet of the community, membership is free today and every other day, but it's a great way to connect with teachers. As Pam was talking to us earlier, she's the only teacher that teaches Exploring Computer Science in our school. And I feel like a lot of teachers are kind of solo in their school doing computer science and trying to find ways to integrate it. So finding a community where you can talk with other teachers, ask questions, come to webinars where you can hear great ideas and network with people is amazing. And to have it free, that's even better. And so you can come to the link for csforallteachers.org and then sign up to be a member. We'd love to have you. And then if you have any questions, you can always email the site. We've got Melissa, who's been hosting us from AIR, who's been so gracious to help us out tonight. And then I want to thank Deborah and Pam for preparing and planning and spending the last hour with us, sharing all of their great ideas.
Thank you, Nicole. Can I just say one thing? If any of the teachers out there want to reach out to me personally, I'm in the ECS Open group. I'd be happy to answer any questions, send you pictures, whatever you need. Just reach out to me on the ECS Open group.
Thank you so much, everyone. This is Melissa again. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've certainly enjoyed the conversation and I've learned just as much in the chat box as I did from the presentation. So I'm so happy to have so many active participants. As I've mentioned in the chat box, we will be adding tonight's presentation as well as the recording link on our website on the event page, which I'm going to post in there again, so you can bookmark that. Give us a day or two, and we'll have that updated so that you are able to take a look. If you want to go back to the recording or if you want to share it with someone who's been part of this. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and tell you all thanks again, and I hope you have a fabulous night.